Boom. What is up, everybody, and welcome back to another Flow video. This is Jacob Tucker, and I'm going to be showing you how to become masters of the Flow blockchain. No, just kidding. Today, I'm going to be showing you how to essentially display a cool little panel on your front-end website or whatever during a transaction, so the user knows exactly what's going on during a transaction. So just to give you an example of this, I'm actually showing you floats right now. So this is an example application that I built with Andrea from the Flow team. They use Svelte actually, but I want to show you what I'm talking about when I'm talking about, like, what it means to like display to a user something, right? So let's actually go to the groups tab here, and let's go to delete this group. And let's see what happens when I run this transaction. So if I delete this group, look at what pops up here. So you see it was showing the transaction status, and you see how it shows every step of the way. So it even shows the link to FlowScan. It says pending. It says, it gives a little description of what's going on. It's also showing this little bar here, and then it concludes, at some point, right? So now it's done. So cool. So this is what I'm going to be showing you how to do. So it's not going to look exactly like that, but it's going to be a similar concept, and you can style it up however you want. So what I have running right now is an example app. I'm actually using a previous video's code. So it's actually very simple so far. It's literally just a base React project, and all it has in it is like two example functions. So reading a number from a contract and updating a number from a contract. You don't even have to know what these contracts are doing. Just know that this function is running a transaction, right? So it's doing await fcl.send. It's sending the transaction, getting the transaction ID, and then logging the transaction ID right here. If you don't understand any of this, go watch the video I did on setting up a project with Blockdo wallet and React. It's literally this code. So that's that. So all you have to know so far is that when we send this transaction, we get a transaction ID back, and it's going to log the transaction ID. So let's go ahead and actually, let's refresh this page, and let's just run the transaction. So I'm already connected. So these two are for the wallet, and this is for reading a number. So I just read the number, and this is for running the transaction. Let's run the transaction. And you'll see that when I click approve here, this is all in testnet, by the way, that it says it logs the transaction ID here, right? So we can take this, for example, and go to testnet.flowscan.org, and we can paste it into here, and it should give us the transaction here. So boom. It's all this cool stuff, right? Now you can see, by the way, the FlowScan is also using this, by the way, right? Because it's showing you that it's sealed. It was showing you this little indicator, right? So it's actually, FlowScan is doing that as well. So I'm going to show you how they're doing that. Okay, so what we can do, first of all, is inside of here, let's actually set this transaction ID to a state variable so that we store it somewhere. So let's use a useState hook. So let's say const set, or let's just say transaction ID, and then set transaction ID equals useState, like that. And then down here, instead of console logging it, we can just do set transaction ID. Set transaction ID to the transaction ID. Cool. Okay, cool. So now that we set the transaction ID here, we can go ahead and just say, so I'll explain what this is doing afterwards. You can say fcl.transaction. You can pass in the transaction ID and say .subscribe. And then .subscribe will take in like a response object, and we can console.log the response here. So basically what's going on here is fcl.transaction, and if you pass in the transaction ID, gives you some information about the current transaction, and .subscribe will get run every single time something about the transaction changes. So just as a hint before we look at it, res is actually the transaction like status or information about the transaction. So every single time information about the transaction changes, this subscribe function will run. So let's go ahead and run this on our front end. So if we go to update, and we wait for this to run, and we click approve, you'll notice it's going to start logging information about our transaction here. So it logs status 0, status string unknown. Now it's pending, right? Now it's unknown again for some reason. Now it's executed. It returned an error, and now it's sealed. So just for the record, the reason I'm actually going to change this right now, so to be 10. So I'm not, in the contract, I'm updating a number to be a certain number. So I made it so that if you pass in 5, it gives you an error. But let's actually just use 10 for now, so we don't get any errors, right? Okay, so if we refresh this again and we update, and I passed in like an actual number this time, that's not going to give us an error. It'll execute just fine. So it's going to say unknown pending now. And look at the status codes, by the way. So status code 0 means that it's unknown, 1 means it's pending, 3 means it's executed, and then 4 should mean sealed. So now it's 4 and it's sealed, so we're all good to go. Now, just as another hint, status code 0 means that everything's fine. So if we get a status of 4 and a status code of 0, that means the transaction was totally fine and it worked. If we get a status of 4 but a status code of 1, that means there was an error. So just for the record, and we'll get into all this in a second. Okay, cool. So now that we know that everything's updating, what we can do is actually create a transaction component that displays and updates this information every single time this thing changes. So let's go ahead down here. Oh, let's actually make a new file called transaction.js, just like this. And we can make a new component. So function transaction will take in like some stuff. So it'll take in a transaction ID. It'll take in a transaction in progress. And it'll take in a transaction status. Okay, so I'll add these in a second here, but this is just so that we can pass in some information. Now the transaction ID is going to be what we're setting right here. So this is the transaction ID. Now this is going to be helpful so that we can link to FlowScan if we want. Transaction status is going to be whether or not is going to be like the actual status code. So the status right here. And then the transaction in progress is just going to tell us whether or not it's in progress so we can display the component. So let's go ahead and add some new state here. So const transaction in progress, and then set transaction in progress, and we'll equals use state, and we'll make it false so that it's not in progress at the beginning. And then we can say transaction status, set transaction status equals use state. And we'll initialize this to like -1 or something. Cool. So now we can go ahead and inside of our update number function, so right when we start, let's just say set transaction in progress is true, right? And let's also say set transaction status is going to be -1, so that there's nothing like, so we're not like, conflicting with any of the status numbers that would display here. Cool. Then we can do is, so then down here, we can say, set every time the subscribe function gets run, it's logging these things, right? So this object, this object, this object. So let's go ahead and actually set the status here to the status of the transaction. So we can say set transaction status to be response.status, like that. And that should be good to go. So now we know information about the status, right? Cool. So, yeah, and we can still log it if we want. Cool. So let's go ahead and actually, we have this right here, and let's just export default transaction like that. Now I'm going to be looking at the side here to sort of help me show you guys what to do. But yeah, okay, cool. And then we can just like return just like, I don't know, like hello or something, just that we know it's working. So inside of our main component now, below everything, let's just display transaction like that. And we can import it up here. So let's import transaction from /transaction.js. Cool. So we can pass in some information to our props inside of the transaction function here. So let's pass in a transaction ID, a transaction in progress, and a transaction status. So the transaction ID is simply just going to be the transaction ID, and this is coming from, this state right here. And again, we set that right here. Cool, right? So that's good. Then we can say the transaction in progress is just going to equal the transaction in progress that we set in the state right here. And then lastly, we're going to do the transaction status. So transaction status equals transaction status. Cool, so we pass all the stuff down through the transaction component, and now we can access that information right here. So what we can say is if, actually, let's just make sure this is working first. So let's just, yeah, so it's putting hello, right? Perfect. So what we can do is we can say, if the transaction is actually in progress, then we want to display something. So we're going to return, let's just do like an article for now. And then otherwise, we're going to return just like nothing, because this component shouldn't be displaying if the transaction is not in progress. So what we can do is we can refresh this page. You'll see nothing is being loaded right now, but if we click on update, you'll see something got loaded right here, right? So you can barely see it, but it's like a little white strip. So that's the article. So just for the record, I also added some default styling so that we wouldn't have to worry about styling, but it'll look somewhat nice when we go through this, okay? So I'm going to cancel this transaction, but you can see that right now, the transaction is somewhat in progress, right? Because we said that right here, that when we click this function, the transaction is in progress true. So it's getting passed down through the transaction component, and now it's saying it's in progress, so we're going to render the article. Awesome. So let's just cancel that for now. Okay, cool. So what we can do is let's start like reasoning about some of the transaction statuses, okay? So inside of this article, we can start doing some cool stuff. So if the transaction status is less than 0, then we can do something, otherwise we'll just return null. And the something here is going to be, let's just open up a div, so it's like a little like container, right? So we can put something in here if the transaction status is less than 0. So if it's less than 0, what that means is we initialize it to -1 here. That just means that we're like preparing some stuff, right? We're initializing the transaction, but the transaction hasn't actually been submitted yet. So so the transaction isn't like real yet, but we're starting it right now. We're initializing it. So if it's less than 0, which is really the same thing as saying equals -1, but you get the point. We can open up a little span here, and we can say the let's say transaction status is going to be and the reason I'm using these elements is because I've already pre-styled them, so it's going to look nice. And we can say initializing, so the transaction is initializing if this is true, and then we can add a little break here. And again, this is just to help the styling. We can put a little small here that says waiting for transaction approval, because this is when the user is actually clicking approve, right? And then we can add a little progress bar here. That is, this, you can use this thing called indeterminate equals true, and this will just make it so there's a little progress bar. I'll show you what this means, and we can just call this initializing. Cool. So let's just show you what this does. So if I go here and I click update now, look what it looks like. It's pretty cool, right? You can see at the bottom there. So let's just do that again one more time. So I click update, it says initializing, right? Waiting for transaction approval. And then this is when the user would have to click approve, okay? So that little thing that's sliding back and forth, that is exactly what this is right here. The indeterminate equals true, and it says initializing, right? So cool. All this is awesome. Now what we can do is we can reason that if the transaction, so instead of null here, let's just keep going. So if the transaction status is equal to 1, then we can do something. Otherwise, we'll just do null for now, right? So let's open up another div. Awesome. And so inside of this div, we can do some other stuff. So let's again do let's copy just some basic stuff here, and we can change things around. So what we're gonna do now, now that the transaction is actually a real thing. So what I also want to do is let's go to the flow documentation, and let's actually look at some of the let's actually look at the transaction statuses. So the transaction status. So this gives you information about what the statuses actually mean. So if the status is 1, this means the transaction is pending and it's awaiting finalization. So we can use that to make some cool stuff. So if the transaction status is 1, it's pending right now. So we can say if the status is 1, we can say transaction status is pending, and it's waiting for we can just say the transaction is currently pending, right? And then down here in the progress bar, we can say that the progress is that it's waiting for it's waiting for finalization. So we can just say like finalizing, like it's currently finalizing, right? So we can just say finalizing like that. Awesome. So that is super cool. Now I'm gonna take again a quick peek at what I have over here, just so that I make sure I'm doing everything right. Awesome. So that's right? So it's currently finalizing. Awesome. So let's go ahead and also the thing is that now that the transaction is a real thing, we can actually put the transaction ID inside of here so that the user can click on it, which is also really cool. So let's go ahead and inside of where do we want to add it? We want to add it right here, let's just say. So after the transaction status, we want to add a little span here that is a link to the to flow scan. So we can open up an A tag just like this, and inside of the A tag, let's go ahead and put the transaction ID. So let's go just put in here the transaction ID, and we can link this. So we can link this A tag to let's just do this long string. So I'm going to copy and paste this in here just because I don't want to have to type all this out. Boom. So let's just go ahead and format this a little nicer so that you can see what's going on. Okay, so this is a link to test.flowscan, and then we're passing in the transaction ID right here. So this is the link that will bring us to the transaction ID. It's pending, the transaction is currently pending, all this fun jazz. So hopefully, if we are to actually, oh, and I just forgot to add a little class here. So if let me just put this little class here so that, because I pre-wrote this again. And also, let's make this target equals blank so that it opens up in a new tab when we click the function here. So let's go ahead and refresh our page, and we'll see some cool stuff. So if we click approve, right? We click approve now, it should be pending right now. So boom, it's pending the transaction status, and we can click it. Oh, I didn't click it in time. Are you serious? I didn't click it. Maybe it'll come back. Okay, no, so it didn't come back. All right, so so I had to click it. So let me go ahead and click it again. Let me click it really quickly. So let's click it. Boom. And look, so now we're at flow scan now, and it's showing us all the cool. It's showing us the actual like transaction here, which is cool. And we can even see like the script code and all that kind of stuff. So that's what's happening. So let's do the next phase, which is execute, right? So let's go ahead. Let's go back. Oh, let's add another one, which is this one right here. So just as a quick tip, by the way, when you're running transactions, it'll rarely ever show this step because it happens so quickly. But let's just go ahead and add it regardless because it'll be kind of cool, right? So let's just go ahead and say the transaction status equals 2. Then we want to add something else, otherwise null, right? So same old, same old. And let's just copy and paste this div because it's going to be very similar. So if it equals 2, then the transaction status should mean, oh, let's actually look. So right now it is finalized and it's waiting for execution. So right now it is finalized and it's currently executing, ... And it's saying the transaction is currently executing. All right. So this should be the same exact thing, but I don't think it'll actually even display. So because it happens so quickly. So if we update and we click on approve, I don't think it'll actually show it, but we'll try and see. So right now it's unknown. It's pending. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. So it doesn't even show it. Now also you'll notice here that on the side it's saying like unknown, right? So for some reason it's saying like, oh, like, you know, it's doing this weird thing. So what we can do here is instead of saying equals 1, let's just say that if it's less than 2, it'll display pending so that it's not doing that weird flip-flop. So that this means that if it's 0 or 1, so let's just go ahead and refresh the page again. So if we update again and wait for this, you'll notice it's not going to go in and out, which is super annoying. It's just going to say pending, like whether or not it's 0 or 1. So it's just going to be pending. And right now you can see it's even unknown right now, but it's still pending. That's fine because it technically is pending. Now it's executed. We haven't done that yet. And then it's going to be sealed. Awesome. So let's go ahead and yeah, so it's giving me an error, but let me just change this to class name really quick. Okay, cool. So now let's check for 3. So let's go ahead and do another one. So transaction status equals 3, something, otherwise null. And this something is going to be the same old div. And you could probably optimize this, right? But you just bear with me here, I guess. So now if the transaction status is 3, that means it's executed and awaiting sealing. So cool. So transaction executed, awaiting sealing. So we can say it is now executed, but it's now the transaction is currently sealing, and we can just say sealing ... Cool. All right, so now we are here. Everything else should be the same. Now, the one thing I do want to talk about is that progress bar that runs at the bottom that goes sliding back and forth. Once it's not pending, we can actually add some stuff so that it's not just going back and forth, and that it's actually like a real progress bar. So I'm looking at, hold on, I'm currently looking at my notes here. Yeah, so what we can actually say is that if the transaction status equals 2, instead of just saying enter whatever, we can do something else and say the minimum value is 0, the maximum value is 100, and the current value equals 80. So that means that if we're at transaction 2, it's going to be, it's going to shift the bar over to a certain amount, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about in a second here, but just bear with me for a sec. And we can say the same thing. We'll just also add this to, you know what we can do? We can say, like, for example, if it is, if it's currently at transaction 2, we'll say the value is 60. But then if it's at the next part, then we'll say it's at 80. So I'll show you exactly what this means right now. So let's go ahead and look at this. So let's refresh the page, update. Now let's see what happens here. So if we click approve, it's going to do this. It's going to say pending. Now it's going to say, let's wait for it. Execute it. So you see the bars is at 80 now. So you see how it stopped right there? That's exactly what we want. Cool. Let me just rename these to class name. It stops giving us a bug. Okay, awesome. So that's cool. Now, one other quick thing I want to do, by the way, is that the transaction IDs are really long. Let's actually slice it so that it's less long. So in each of these transaction IDs, let's just do, what we can do in app.js, let's just do transaction ID.slice, and let's just do 0 to 8 so that it's much less annoying. So let's go back and just, let me show you what this looks like now. Oh, I messed something up. That's not good. Okay, looks like I messed something up. So let's just, can we add this here and see if that fixes it? Okay, yeah, so I just added this little null thing so that if it's null, it's not gonna slice it. Let's update, right? And if we wait for it right now, click approve, and you'll see that it gives us like a very nice little thing here, so we can just click that, right? And we can even make it like, you know, yeah, so very easy. And then we can even say like, you know, ... so that it's like we inform the user that there's like more, but you know, that's all we're giving them right now. Awesome. So now what we can do is we can do if the status code equals 4. So let's go ahead and do that. So if the status code equals 4, that means the transaction is sealed, so it's complete, and then at this point the transaction result has been committed to the blockchain. So let's go ahead and actually do that right now. So let's do another one. So let's just say if the transaction status equals 4, then we want to do something, otherwise null. Let's copy and paste. Same old, same old. So now it is sealed, and the progress should be 100, right? So the progress should be 100, and then we should say, hey, it is sealed, right? So the transaction, and you know what we can even do for our text? Let's just copy and paste this. So transaction complete. At this point, the transaction result has been committed to the blockchain. So we can use that as our message. Awesome. Okay, cool. So that should be good. So we should watch the whole process now. So let's see the whole process happen. So update, approve. It's pending, right? So it's currently pending. And it says the transaction is currently pending. Now it says executed. And now it says sealed. Yay, so we did it. Now it's sealed, and then it's gonna go away because you know, obviously it's gonna, yeah. So actually no, I think it should just stay here unless we like automatically remove it. But you can see that now it's sealed and the transaction is done. So I hope this helped. Oh, one thing I want to mention really quickly is that you can do something else. So let me just let me change this number to 5 here so that we get an error. So let's actually, what we could also do is let's pass in the status code as well. So the status code, so the status is this number. That's what we kept using. The status code is whether or not there was an error, right? So we can actually say set status code, or set transaction status code to be res.status code, like that. And we can actually, we have to define this variable, of course. So let's just say const transaction status code, set transaction status code equals use state. We'll just say it's like 0 initially. So then that way down here, we can pass in transaction status code equals transaction status code, just like that. And this is cool because what we can say now is if at any point, so if there's a transaction in progress, and let's actually pass in transaction status code. So we can say if the transaction in progress and transaction status code equals 0, then do this, because that means there's no error currently. However, otherwise, so else if, we can just add like an else if transaction status code equals 1, then there's a problem. Wait, what just happened? Otherwise, there is a problem. Okay, and what we can do is we can display another article that just says like problem, right? So it's just very easy like that. So let's run this transaction, and this one should give us an error because I passed in 5, which just in the contract, it's not gonna like it. So if we click approve here, hopefully this should work, I think. So it's currently pending. The transaction code 0, so it's still fine, it's still fine, it's still fine. Okay, so something happened. What the heck just happened? Hold on one sec. So this usually means a return statement. Oh, it's because I forgot to do return. Oops. So I totally forgot to do return here. So let's just pass in return. That's my bad. Okay, this should be fine now. So if let's just refresh the page and update again. So click update. approve. And by the way, if any of you are curious, I'm gonna post all of this just for the record so that you can like have this. Like all the styling here is from Pico CSS if you ever used it. Oh, say look, okay, boom. So it found an error, right? It panicked. It said cadence runtime error, there's a problem, and the status code's 1. So now it's like problem, right? So you can do whatever styling you want here as well. You get the point. But you know, you can do that. And what you could even say is like, you know, there's a problem, like, and then you can just say like view problem here, right? View problem here, and then just pass in a link to the problem. So I'm just gonna, it's so hard coded, but like you get the point. So if I click update again, just trying to show you like what you can do. Click approve. Sorry this video went so long, by the way. I did not mean for this video to be so long. Yeah, so hopefully it should work. View problem here, and then we can click it, and then we can view the problem. Oh, it's not found. Oh, it's because, oh, so I actually realized I made a mistake. Okay, so I actually made a mistake. So you can't slice here, because if you slice here, what's going to happen is, it's going to pass in the wrong transaction ID, right? So you actually have to slice inside of here. So that's totally my fault. So transaction ID dot slice 0 to 8. Yeah, that's totally my fault. You can't slice up there, or else the transaction is going to be totally wrong. So let's replace all these just like that. Okay, so hopefully if we do this again one more time, I promise it should be okay. I hope. Let's see. So we click this. Yep, it's working again. Awesome. Now, if we wait for it to be an error, view problem here, we click it, and it takes us to the problem, and now here's the problem, right? So boom, that's it. Hope that was helpful. I'll finally shut up. Yeah, and I'll post all this code to GitHub so you can have it. So thanks, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.